Hello and welcome to the Veterans History Project on the Vineland Public Schools TV. I'm Ross Stanger and I'll be your host today. Over the past few months, we've been working with district educators in the Vineland Public Schools TV to create a series of interviews of veterans who are from Vineland and served in our country's armed forces. This series is a continuation of interviews that are a part of the historical record of the Vineland Archives Alive project, which documented the history of Vineland through online student-created projects. Today is March 4th, 2013, and we're recording this interview in the TV studio at Vineland High School North. Assisting me today are members of the Vineland Public Schools TV crew, including David Sanchez, Dan Tiola, Ryan Steinbron, and Daniela Villeman. The producer is F. John Sabrana, the Executive Director of Communications for the Vineland Public Schools. My guest today is George H. Stanger, Jr. He was born on September 12, 1942, and is 70 years old. Mr. Stanger, Dad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ross.
Dad, tell us a little bit about where and when you were born, please.
I was born in Vineland on September 12, 1942. Went to school through high school in Vineland.
Okay. And what were you doing before you entered the service?
I was in what was then the New Jersey Bell Telephone Company training program, a management training program. I entered that right after I graduated from college in June of 1964.
Okay. And then also, if you could, just to prelude your service, were there other members of the family who served in the military before you?
Yes. My dad, George Sr., was 4F for World War II, but still ended up being the commander of the New Jersey State Guard, which was the group constituted after the New Jersey National Guard was nationalized and sent off to Europe in World War II.
Okay.
And then our cousin Joe was in the 2nd of the 505th of the 82nd Airborne Division and had 4 combat parachute jumps in World War II.
And could you give us your educational history after high school, after you left the Vineland Public Schools?
Sure. Yeah, I graduated from Vineland High in 1960 and then went to Syracuse University where I obtained a BS degree. The university had an ROTC program, Army ROTC, and I was part of that, and that's how I ended up being commissioned a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army.
Okay. So you served in the Vietnam War.
Yes.
And what you said you were commissioned as a second lieutenant. What happened after that? Were you promoted at any point thereafter?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I graduated in June, didn't enter the Army until November of 1964, went through training at Aberdeen, Maryland until April, and then was shipped to Fort Riley, Kansas, and assigned to the 1st Infantry Division. The 1st Infantry Division was then sent to Vietnam, and while in Vietnam, I was promoted to first lieutenant.
Do you remember basic training at all?
You try to forget things like that, but yes.
What was it like? Tell us a little bit about what it was like. Was it difficult for you?
Yes, the physical part of it was. I had been working in a management training program for the telephone company for 5 months prior and not really concentrating on staying in shape, and once I got to basic, I regretted that, but you overcome those things. And it was in the wintertime, which was not fun. In Maryland, it snowed and rained, and we spent a fair amount of time outdoors.
And did it involve running? I mean, do you remember a drill sergeant at all? Or did you know a lot of those types of close order drill from your ROTC program?
Well, we knew all the ROTC drill, so we didn't really do a whole lot of that. A lot of it was the technical stuff, which is what the Ordnance Corps was involved with.
Okay. Did you have any specialized training at all before going to Vietnam?
Well, when we were in Fort Riley, Kansas, Vietnam hadn't even surfaced on the news horizon. I remember when we were in Fort Riley, which is in Manhattan, Kansas, which is the home of Kansas State, we were watching the evening news one night, what was then Huntley Brinkley, and they showed that a soldier from the 173rd Airborne Brigade had been awarded the Medal of Honor. And I remember turning to my wife and saying, if they're awarding the Medal of Honor, then we're at war. And we really didn't have the realization, and I was in the Army at the time, that we were really at war then.
Okay.
But then it hit.
Okay. How long were you in Kansas when you were training for Vietnam? I mean, did you just train in Kansas, or were you able to get any experience of what it would be like, say, in Vietnam?
Well, we had two different alerts that we were going to be shipped overseas. There were no Army infantry divisions in Vietnam in the summer of 1965. There was this 173rd Airborne Brigade, and the Marines were already there. And it was supposedly a secret that we were going. So we couldn't tell anybody that that's what we were training for. But I recall driving through downtown Manhattan, Kansas, and all of the shops had these big posters in them and paint on the windows. You know, good luck in Vietnam, 1st Division, give them hell, big red one. So the merchants knew it, but we weren't supposed to know it.
Sure, sure, okay. So you got the word that you were getting shipped out.
Yeah.
What was that like for you and Mom at the time?
Well, we always tried to find humor in it. The Army back then issued white underwear. And somewhere along the line, somebody decided that we ought not be showing white T-shirts in the jungle of green. So an order came out that everyone, officers and enlisted men, had to dye their underwear green. So the main clothing dye back then was called RIT, R-I-T. I don't know if it's still around or not, but there was a run on green RIT dye in all the downtown stores, and we were given a rather short time period within which to do it. My wife, your mom, did it, and I remember seeing in the newspapers about 3 or 4 days later, because what had happened is that all the enlisted men took their underwear to the laundromats in downtown Manhattan, dyed all their underwear green, and apparently the next day housewives from Manhattan took their laundry there, and they all complained that their husband's white shirts came out with a green tint to them.
That's funny.
And they had something else to blame on the Army.
Sure.
There's a PS to that story, but we'll get to that later if you want to.
Sure, sure.
But we were told we were going to go, then that order was canceled. That's when we dyed our underwear. And then we were ordered to undergo 30 days of intensive jungle warfare training in the deserts of Kansas, which it was rather hard to simulate a rice paddy or a palm tree or whatever else jungle, out there with the sagebrush blowing around the deserts of Kansas. But that's, we did 30 days of intensive jungle warfare training.
Okay. Now, how did you get to Vietnam at that time?
When the order came down, it was around probably the end of August of 1965, and I came home one day and I told my wife, I can take you back to Ohio tomorrow. And so we had one day to get ready. My wife went around putting little sticky notes on everything because the Army was going to pack all of our possessions and store them while I was overseas. and your mom and I drove 19 straight hours through to Ohio from Kansas.
Wow.
We were there for, I think, 4 or 5 days, and then I flew back to Kansas. We got on a train, went to San Francisco. The entire, well, I guess it was our entire brigade. Obviously more than one train. We only saw one train. We went into San Francisco and then boarded a Navy ship, the Sultan, and went from San Francisco to the Philippines, stayed a while in the Philippines, a couple of days, and then went to Vietnam from the Philippines.
What was the trip like with all the men on the ship? And
The first 3 days out of San Francisco was really, really bad. It was a storm. And I had never been seasick in my life, even though I had grown up on the Delaware Bay. I remember one of our enlisted men, he was a kid from Iowa, and he was so sick, the only thing he could eat the entire trip over, and I think it took us 14 or 15 days before we got to Subic Bay in the Philippines, were Hershey bars. And the first 3 nights out, the enlisted men's area was just awash in vomit. It was not a pleasant time. So we spent as much time on the deck
sure.
as we possibly could.
So what was it like when you arrived in Vietnam? You were there very early in
We were
September,
there.
October of 1965, is that right?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I left San Francisco on my birthday.
Wow.
And the Army promised you would be there 1 year, so I returned exactly 1 year later on my birthday.
Not a great birthday going out, of course, but
No, great birthday.
better birthday coming back.
Great, yeah, of course they flew us back, too.
Sure.
That was even better.
Yeah.
They issued us ammunition for our rifles, which everyone was a little bit surprised about. And everyone had seen the movies of the Normandy invasion. We didn't know what we were in for. As it turned out, and they put us in landing craft, and as it turned out, as we approached the shore, we could hear what we thought was music. And as it turned out, it was not a hostile reception at all. The First Division band was there.
Okay.
And all these little Vietnamese schoolgirls had been given the day off, and they were all waving American flags. So
Okay.
it was a very friendly reception.
Maybe the best reception you had in a year.
Yes, yes.
Sure. Did you, so tell us a little bit about the living arrangements and the environment where you were stationed.
Well, we went to a staging area first, and our equipment was offloaded. And then we were told we were going to be going to this base camp that was 30 miles north of Saigon in a former Michelin rubber company plantation in the area known as Lai Khe, L-A-I-K-H-E, which was right next to the Vietnamese town of Ben Cat. And we arrived there. We established a perimeter the first night. We didn't have any tents or anything else. Everybody was eating sea rations, which are the canned Army rations. And I remember I was the executive officer of the company, which meant I was second in command. And I remember walking out through these rubber trees and realizing that the infantry unit that had been in front of us had all of a sudden moved to the right, and we had a gap of about 120, 150 yards. Went back, told my company commander, and we then had to send people out very quickly to dig foxholes and prepare for whatever would be coming that night. And as it turned out, the VC obviously had seen that there was an opening And our first night really at this base camp, we were under attack.
What was that like? What were your emotions like and how would it happen? What were your emotions? What did you feel?
You're scared to death. You realize that people are shooting at you. We had a lot of sandbags up, and we were well armed and well supplied. We had time to put barbed wire out, and it was a very scary evening. We had a forward observer from an artillery unit attached to us, which is probably one of the few times in the history of the Army that an ordnance company actually had an artillery forward observer. But he was out there with us, and the artillery was only maybe 200 or 300 yards behind us. And I recall walking back there the next day and seeing the artillery tubes, the barrels of the artillery tubes, almost vertical.
Okay.
Because that's the only way that they
could get it down
shoot
there.
and get it down close enough to us.
Sure.
And it was interesting, we went out the next day because you're supposed to do that, and we were in rubber trees, which are spaced maybe on 30-foot centers, perfect rows in both directions. And they gather the rubber sap much like you see pictures in New England of people gathering maple syrup, where there's a little funnel-type device that's put in the tree, and then it flows down into a cup, and rubber sap is a white syrupy mix. And the collection cups in front of our area were all turned upside down, apparently by the workers who had been there the day before. We thought civilians, as a sign to the VC that this is where you want to go, because there was obviously a gap. We filled that gap.
Now, how did, so clearly, right off the bat, it sounds like you got the impression that the villagers were not entirely all friendly. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah. One of the underlying themes that we heard about continually was winning the hearts and minds of the people. That was what we were told we wanted to do. But with that kind of an introduction to the populace, it was rather hard to understand that they really wanted us there and wanted any help from us.
What was your impression going in? Was your impression that the people would be feeling as though you were liberating them from the communists? What were your impressions?
Yeah, you have to hearken back. It was a different age from the students today. I mean, we grew up in a world where we had atom bomb drills where you got underneath your desk. And the communist menace was seen as something to be feared. You just thought that the Russians were coming the next day. So there was a very clear line drawn between democracy and freedom and communism and suppression. And when we went over there, and we had indoctrination lectures, and I believed that what we were doing was absolutely the right thing, trying to help these people. And as it turned out, we saw in many instances the tactics and techniques that the VC, the Vietnamese communists, used to try to impose their will. And they were bad people. They were just not nice.
Okay. If you could, Talk about any friendships that you formed. Did you have a lot of camaraderie with other officers, or were you able to spend some time with any of the men with whom you served to get to know them in any capacity?
Yes and no. We had a succession of officers who went through our company. My company commander, Captain Barone, was probably my best friend there. And then you have to understand that there's a dividing line between officers and enlisted men.
Sure.
And you simply have a line that you shouldn't cross.
Okay.
As far as friendship is concerned.
Okay.
So I was friendly with some sergeants, the sergeant who worked for me,
Mm-hmm.
but as far as establishing long-time friendships, no.
Okay. Now you have some you have some things that you've brought today. What did you bring?
Every man in Vietnam had what's called a short-timers calendar. And I don't know if you can see this or not. These are wallet-sized calendars
Okay.
that I kept in my wallet, and every day you crossed the day off so that you could see how close you were to fulfilling that requirement
The
of
1 year's
year.
requirement.
The 33 in the middle
Okay.
was from 33 beer.
What is 33 beer? It's a
That was
brand of beer?
it was a brand of beer in Vietnam, and it was the only beer that we could get for many, many, many months.
Okay.
And was one of the reasons we made the supply runs down to Saigon.
Okay. Okay.
This is what's called a military payment certificate. The government was afraid that there would be a black market trade in greenbacks, dollar bills.
Okay.
So they issued us military payment certificates. That's a dime, that's a quarter, that's a 50-cent piece.
Okay.
And so we didn't have any change, so to speak of.
Okay.
They were all military payment certificates so that there could not then be a black market in American dollars.
I see. Okay.
The other thing that I have here, these are called Choi pamphlets that were dropped out of helicopters and airplanes. And if a Viet Cong showed up holding one of these, it said on the back that he would be treated properly and be taken a prisoner and certainly not shot. I never saw it used, but some of the other units near us did.
Okay.
I brought what's called a punji board.
Can you hold that up for us for a few seconds
Sure.
there so everybody can see it?
We were on a convoy going down to Saigon one day, and the training is that if you're in a vehicle and there is an ambush, you try to run through it if you can. Well, as it turned out, a truck that was maybe 7 or 8 in front of us, an explosion went up in front and went sideways in the road, so we couldn't go past it because there were rice paddies on both sides, and we could obviously hear incoming fire. So the thing that you do is just jump out and get prone.
Mm-hmm.
And when I landed in the rice paddy, which didn't have a whole lot of water in it, this and one just like it was next to it. And after the whole thing was over, I figured I'd pick them up as a souvenir. So I brought them home. What I found fascinating about it, there were 2 of them. The other one is now down in the Forgotten Warriors Museum in Cape May, which is a museum dedicated to the Vietnam War.
Okay.
And you can see on that more clearly on this, but what the VC did was take our throwaways and use them against us. The wood through which these metal barbs are protruding is an American-made ammunition box for mortar shells. And the barbs have been fashioned out of the metal tubes in which artillery shells are transported, and they would just discard them. And the VC, being very ingenious souls, would take them, flatten them out, and use them in that manner.
A very ingenious way of...
Yeah, using your own equipment, your discards against you.
Absolutely. Did you learn anything from your service in Vietnam? Did you take anything home from it that...
Well, you learn a lot about yourself when you're put in a situation where your life is or could be endangered. I was responsible at times for anywhere between maybe 8 or 9 men up to 40 men when we were out on an operation, and you learn a lot about how to motivate people, how to lead people, and you learn that you lead by example.
How did you stay in touch with Mom and other people back home?
One of the items in this frame is a 5-cent stamp, and that may seem rather incredible today, but that's what the stamp that was used, that Mom would use to send letters to me.
Okay.
I had a free stamp privilege. All we had to do was to write on the envelope where the stamp would be, APO 96345, which was our Army post office address.
Okay.
And that served in lieu of a stamp. So
All
the
right.
post office accepted that, so we didn't have to have and worry about stamps. I wrote her every day. She wrote me just about every day. I didn't have a chance to mail them every day when we were out on operations, but I would do the best I can, or I could. And I had a small plastic bag and would put the letters in there. And then when we got back to our base camp, I would mail them.
How often would you get mail? Was that an exciting time? I mean,
Mail call was almost every day if we were back in base camp.
wow. Okay.
The engineers who were with us fashioned an airfield, and the Army knew the importance of mail, and we would have plane flights in or helicopter flights in. There were a lot of helicopters in and out. But the Army had a plane called a Caribou, which was pretty much a taxi service for us, and the Caribous would come in and out every day.
Now, you've mentioned that there was an artillery base there and an airfield. Was there? Tell me a little bit about your barracks, the food, other basic, what daily life was like when you were there.
We were in this Michelin rubber plantation, and the Michelin company had buildings there, which we used some of them for our repair shops. The brigade headquarters was there, our hospital was there, and it was one large building really under one roof that had been abandoned by the French, but was still there and still, very usable. We didn't have group tents for, it was probably 3 weeks or 4 weeks. We just had pup tents, or we just slept on the ground. It wasn't that bad then. It wasn't the rainy season, but mostly in pup tents. And then we built bunkers, which were sandbag bunkers, and you could sleep in them if you needed to. Then we got tents, and then the big sign of civilization we felt was when we got plywood floors. If you could actually step on a plywood floor, that was a great sign of success.
Okay.
Close to civilization.
Sure.
The food at the beginning, or when we were out in the field, was canned sea rations.
Sure.
And then one of my favorite stories from my unit was our mess sergeant, who was apparently renowned throughout the Army. We used to have all of the reporters and photographers who covered our brigade always ate at our mess hall or mess tent. He was eventually killed in an ambush because we were setting up a Christmas party for children from a nearby Catholic orphanage. And he would go into town almost every day, into this little town of Ben Cat, and take what leftovers we had to either take them to the orphanage or distribute them. And he was literally winning the hearts and minds.
Sure.
And my company commander, the gentleman I mentioned, Captain Barone, was one for self-exposure and publicity, and he wrangled out of the Life magazine correspondent who was with us a promise that our company would be on the front cover of Life magazine if we could throw a Christmas party for these children. So in the process, and the orphanage knew it, and the Catholic sisters there knew it, and obviously the VC knew it, and we managed to get in all the fixings and trimmings for an American-style Christmas in Vietnam. And 3 days before, and it wasn't actually Christmas, it was the first week of December, because Life magazine said that we had to have all the photographs done because they had to be flown back.
Sure.
And, no electronic transmission of photographs.
Sure.
And he and a warrant officer and one of our PFCs were driving down to Ben Cat from our base camp. And they were ambushed by some VC, a grenade tossed in the Jeep, and Sergeant McMillan was killed. The other two badly wounded. They but eventually survived. But,
Okay. Wow.
the consensus was that the VC just didn't want us to be able to have this Christmas party for the kids, but we had it anyway.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about coming home. You said you flew home?
Flew home to go back as we left from San Francisco, and I remember going underneath the Golden Gate Bridge.
Okay.
And the Army kept its word, and 365 days later, I was on an airplane out of Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base there in Saigon on the way home. And it was a chartered flight, civilian airliner, but chartered. And of course, the stewardesses got probably more attention on those flights than they'd ever gotten on any flights before.
Sure.
We flew from Tan Son Nhut in Saigon to Guam, from Guam to Hawaii, which is where I sent your mom that telegram that's in this book here.
Okay.
And then from Hawaii, we flew to back to Travis Air Force Base in right outside San Francisco.
Okay.
And as we were coming in, we were in the clouds, and the pilot came on, and he said, "Guys, I'm going to do something that I'm really not supposed to do," but he said, I think you deserve this. And he brought the plane down through the clouds and tilted it to the left so everybody could see it. I was on the left-hand side of the aircraft. And as we came down through this cloud bank there, with the sun shining on it, was the Golden Gate Bridge. And it was a wonderful sight.
That's a great story. What was it like returning and readjusting to civilian life? Were you able to do that right away, or were you still in the service? How did it work?
The Army had a policy then that if you came home from a combat zone and you had less than 90 days to go on your commitment, which I did, you would get what they called an early out. So I went to the Army base there at the Presidio, which is in San Francisco. We got in on a Thursday, and you had to have your out processing, and you got your physical. And that's, as you well know, I left a little bit of hearing over there.
Yeah.
And I remember telling this doctor, I'd like to be tested. I can't hear as well in my left ear as I could when I went over. And this was on a Friday, and he said, here's your choice, Lieutenant. The audiologist won't be here till next Tuesday. Now, you can wait around and see the audiologist, or you can waive that, and I'll sign all your papers, and you can be on a plane flight home this afternoon.
Okay.
So I said, I'm going home,
Sure,
doctor.
sure.
So I flew and I called your mother, flew from there to Chicago, and then she was in Ohio at the time.
Okay.
And she met me at the Cleveland airport about
Okay.
1 a.m. in the morning.
Wow. Now, was there anybody there?
No.
Today there's a lot more hoopla about people coming home and the different veterans organizations and so forth, the greeting troops. But I've also heard stories of the late 1960s and early 1970s when there were lots and lots of anti-war protests. Were you somewhere in the middle where there was sort of no reception but no negativity? What was it like for you?
Well, we were required to wear our uniform. So I was in, and this is September, so it was still
Nice out.
Yeah, fairly nice out. So it was short sleeve, what they called tans then. And I recall one man as we walked down. Back then they didn't have the tubes that went out to the aircraft.
Oh, sure, you walked.
You just walked down a ladder almost, and then across the tarmac back into the terminal. And I remember one gentleman in the terminal, an older man, and he said, "Welcome home."
Oh, he knew you'd come home.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, in my uniform.
Sure,
so,
sure, okay.
So that was about the only thing I heard. And
Okay.
Then your mother was very glad to see me.
Definitely, definitely. Okay. Is there anything else that I haven't asked about that you'd like to talk about today?
I can tell you a postscript
Sure.
to the green T-shirt story.
Sure, absolutely.
Which is one of my favorite stories. We were on the boat, and then we landed at Subic Bay in the Philippines, and I was the company commander on the way over because our company commander had flown over. He didn't apparently want to endure 20-some days on a boat.
Okay.
So I was the company commander, and we were in Subic Bay, and it was a huge naval base at the time. We landed, and the troops were told that you get off the ship, actually walk on dry land for a change. But you had to stay on the naval base, which was big. However, with every naval base there, and some Army bases, there are always a collection of commercial enterprises right outside the gates of any base.
Sure.
It was the second night we were in Subic Bay. We slept on the ship, and since I was the company commander, I shared my room only with one other officer, and there was this knock on the door, and it was my company first sergeant, and he said, "Lieutenant, you have to get up. We have a couple of guys in trouble. The SPs, that's the Navy Shore Police. The
Military police for the Navy. Okay.
Military police. So they've picked up a couple of our guys, and they're in the brig, and the Navy duty officer has asked us to come over and see what we can do." So I got dressed, we went over, and two of my guys had decided that they wanted to get off the Navy base to go see the local sites.
Sure.
And what they had done was to rent sailors' uniforms from a couple of sailors. They paid them. So these guys were in you know, with the sailor cap and
Sure.
the sailor whites. And they decided to just walk right off the base. What they forgot, however, was that with the sailor uniform, you could see the top of your underwear. And they had green T-shirts showing. and the SPs figured out that these guys probably weren't sailors.
Sure. That's a good story.
So we visited them in the Navy brig. They're sitting there in their underwear because they had taken the sailors' uniforms off them. First sergeant said, where are your uniforms? We don't know. They said, all right. So first sergeant handcuffed them and put them in the Jeep that we had. And in their underwear, we took them back to the ship.
Sure. Probably worse than jail at that point.
They were not happy fellows.
No, definitely not. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for talking to us today.
You're certainly welcome.
It's always been something I've wanted to do, to record your story as part of the the historical record with the Veterans History Project, and I'm proud and honored to do it.
Glad we had a chance to do it,
So
Ross.
I'd like to thank you
You're
again
certainly welcome.
for
Thank you.
coming in. And I'd like to thank the viewers as well for watching another edition of the Veterans History Project with the Veterans TV here at the Vineland Public Schools. I'd like to encourage you to stay tuned to Channel 9 and Channel 41 for more quality educational programming. Good night.